A decorated military sergeant brutally attacks his pregnant sister-in-law during what was supposed to be a peaceful family getaway in the mountains of Colorado, leaving his wife traumatized and his marriage destroyed forever. But 18 months later, a hiker discovers something shocking, hidden beneath the cabin floorboards, a discovery that would expose the terrifying truth about what really happened that cold February night, and reveal who the real monster was all along. David Chen Rodriguez had served 3 tours overseas, earning medals for valor and saving countless lives, but nothing could have prepared him for the battle he would face in his own family. His wife Rachel trusted him completely, and when her younger sister Isabella announced her pregnancy, Rachel insisted they celebrate with a romantic mountain retreat. Isabella, 6 months pregnant and recently divorced, needed the emotional support, and David agreed to the trip despite his growing unease about his sister-in-law's increasingly erratic behavior. The cabin rental in the remote Colorado mountains seemed perfect for healing and bonding, but what happened during those 3 days would shatter everything David believed about family, loyalty, and survival. The local sheriff's department received the frantic 911 call at 2:47 in the morning on February 15th. David's voice was barely coherent, screaming that there had been an accident, that Isabella was hurt badly, and that Rachel needed immediate medical attention. When first responders arrived at the isolated cabin 40 minutes later, they found a scene that would haunt them forever. Blood covered the kitchen floor, furniture was overturned, and Rachel was unconscious in the bedroom with severe head trauma. Isabella was nowhere to be found, but the trail of blood leading to the back door told a horrifying tale. David sat in shock, his military training apparently useless against whatever had unfolded in that remote cabin. David Chen Rodriguez met Rachel Martinez during his second deployment when she worked as a civilian contractor on the base in Afghanistan. Their romance blossomed through late-night conversations about their dreams of returning home, and Rachel's gentle spirit provided the perfect counterbalance to David's intense military discipline. They married 18 months after his return, settling into a quiet life in Denver, where David worked as a security consultant and Rachel taught elementary school. Rachel's younger sister Isabella had always been the wild child of the Martinez family. While Rachel pursued education and stability, Isabella bounced between jobs, relationships, and cities, leaving a trail of drama wherever she went. Their parents had passed away in a car accident 5 years earlier, leaving Rachel feeling responsible for her unpredictable sister. Isabella's marriage to a wealthy businessman had lasted only 14 months before ending in a bitter divorce that left her pregnant and financially desperate. When Isabella called Rachel in January, sobbing about her situation, Rachel immediately invited her to stay with them. David had reservations about Isabella's presence in their home, but he respected his wife's loyalty to family. Isabella was charming when she wanted to be, telling elaborate stories about her travels and making Rachel laugh until tears streamed down her face. However, David noticed disturbing patterns in Isabella's behavior that Rachel seemed to miss or ignore. Isabella had a habit of lying about small things that did not matter, then becoming defensive when caught in contradictions. She would disappear for hours without explanation, returning with expensive items she claimed to have found or received as gifts. Most concerning to David was how Isabella manipulated situations to become the center of attention, especially when Rachel and David were having intimate conversations or quiet moments together. The pregnancy added another layer of complexity to Isabella's presence in their home. She claimed the father was her ex-husband, but the timeline did not match up with their separation. When pressed for details, Isabella would become emotional and accuse Rachel of not supporting her during the most difficult period of her life. Rachel, desperate to help her sister, would apologize and drop the subject, leaving David feeling frustrated and unheard. David's military background had taught him to recognize manipulation and deception, skills that had kept him alive in combat zones. Isabella's behavior triggered every instinct he had developed during his years of service, but Rachel interpreted his concerns as jealousy or overprotectiveness. The tension in their household grew steadily, as Isabella's stay stretched from a few weeks into months. Rachel suggested the mountain retreat as a way for the 3 of them to bond and work through their differences. She had found a beautiful cabin rental near Aspen, complete with a fireplace, mountain views, and enough space for everyone to have privacy. Isabella enthusiastically agreed to the trip, claiming she needed the peace and quiet to prepare for motherhood. David reluctantly consented, hoping that getting away from their daily routines might help them establish healthier boundaries. The cabin was owned by an elderly couple who rented it out during the winter months while they stayed in Arizona. Located 15 miles from the nearest town, the property offered complete isolation and stunning views of snow-covered peaks. The rental included a fully equipped kitchen, 3 bedrooms, and a hot tub on the back deck. Rachel had planned activities like hiking, cooking together, and evening conversations by the fire. David packed his service weapon out of habit, a decision that would later become crucial evidence in the investigation. He also brought his first aid kit and emergency radio, standard precautions for any remote location. Isabella packed 3 large suitcases for the 3-day trip, claiming she needed options for different weather conditions. Rachel was excited about the opportunity to reconnect with her sister and help David understand Isabella's positive qualities. The drive to the cabin took 4 hours through winding mountain roads that became increasingly treacherous as they gained elevation. Isabel complained constantly about the cold, the car's heating system, and David's driving, while Rachel tried to maintain a cheerful atmosphere by pointing out scenic views and discussing their plans for the weekend. David focused on navigating the icy roads, noting how Isabel's criticism seemed designed to create conflict rather than express genuine concerns. They arrived at the cabin just as the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the snow-covered property. The isolation was immediately apparent, with no other buildings visible in any direction and no cell phone service. David felt his military instincts kick in as he surveyed the surroundings, automatically noting escape routes and potential defensive positions. Isabella seemed delighted by the remoteness, commenting repeatedly about how perfect it was for secrets and private conversations. The first evening passed relatively peacefully as they settled into their rooms and prepared dinner together. Rachel had planned a menu of comfort foods, and Isabella surprised them by revealing she had learned to cook during her marriage. They shared stories and laughter over homemade pasta and wine, with Isabella being charming and engaging. David began to think maybe Rachel was right about giving her sister another chance. However, subtle tensions emerged as the evening progressed. Isabella made pointed comments about David's military service, questioning whether he had ever killed anyone, and suggesting that soldiers often brought violence home with them. When Rachel defended her husband, Isabella apologized with exaggerated sweetness, claiming she was just curious about his experiences. David recognized the manipulation, but chose to let it slide for Rachel's sake. After Rachel went to bed early, claiming pregnancy exhaustion, Isabella lingered in the living room with David. She poured herself another glass of wine despite her pregnancy, and began asking increasingly personal questions about his marriage. Isabella wanted to know if Rachel satisfied him emotionally and physically, whether he ever thought about other women, and if he regretted marrying into her family. David firmly redirected the conversation and excused himself to join his wife. The second day brought fresh snow and outdoor activities that Rachel had planned. They went for a short hike on the property, with Isabella complaining about the cold and demanding frequent rest stops. During lunch, Isabella announced that she had been thinking about naming the baby after their deceased father, a revelation that brought Rachel to tears of joy. David noticed that Isabella watched Rachel's emotional response with satisfaction rather than sharing in the moment. That afternoon, while Rachel napped, Isabella cornered David in the kitchen while he was preparing coffee. She stood uncomfortably close, touching his arm while she spoke, and made comments about how lonely she had been since her divorce. When David stepped away, Isabella accused him of being cold and unwelcoming to family. She claimed that Rachel had told her David did not want her staying with them, a lie that David knew would hurt his wife if repeated. Isabella's behavior became increasingly erratic as the day continued. She would be sweet and helpful one moment, then sharp and critical the next. She questioned David's decisions about everything from the thermostat setting to the choice of television programs. When Rachel tried to mediate, Isabella would become tearful and claim that David was making her feel unwelcome during the most vulnerable time in her life. The evening meal was tense despite Rachel's efforts to maintain a festive atmosphere. Isabella drank wine throughout dinner, ignoring David's gentle reminders about pregnancy safety. She told elaborate stories about her travels and relationships, many of which contradicted things she had said earlier. When David politely pointed out an inconsistency, Isabella became defensive and accused him of not believing her. After dinner, Isabella insisted on going out to the hot tub despite the freezing temperatures. She emerged from her room wearing a revealing bathing suit and a sheer cover-up, claiming she needed to relax her pregnancy aches. Rachel decided to join her, and David reluctantly agreed to supervise for safety reasons. The scene felt inappropriate to David, especially when Isabella made comments about how the warm water felt good against her skin and how free she felt without her clothes. Rachel fell asleep early again, leaving David and Isabella alone in the living room. This time, Isabella was more direct in her advances, moving closer to David on the couch and placing her hand on his thigh. When he firmly removed her hand and stood up, Isabella became angry, accusing him of thinking he was too good for her. She threatened to tell Rachel that David had made inappropriate advances toward her, a threat that sent chills down David's spine. David spent the night lying awake, listening to every sound in the cabin and questioning his decision to come on this trip. His military training told him that Isabella was dangerous, but he struggled with how to protect his wife from her own sister without destroying their marriage. He had no way to call for help or leave early without explanations that Rachel might not believe. The isolation that had seemed peaceful now felt threatening. The third day began with an argument between Rachel and Isabella about breakfast preparations. Isabella had used the last of the eggs to make herself a large omelette, leaving nothing for David and Rachel. When Rachel gently suggested they share the remaining food, Isabella exploded into a rage about feeling unwelcome and unappreciated. She accused Rachel of choosing David over family and threatened to leave immediately. Rachel was devastated by her sister's anger and spent the morning trying to apologize and smooth things over. David watched his wife bend over backwards to accommodate Isabella's demands, including giving up their planned activities and letting Isabella choose how they spent their final day. Isabella seemed to enjoy Rachel's distress, making increasingly unreasonable demands and then acting hurt when they were not met with enthusiasm. By afternoon, the tension had reached a breaking point. Isabella announced that she had been recording conversations throughout the trip to prove that David was hostile toward her. She claimed she needed evidence for her lawyer because she was considering filing harassment charges. Rachel was shocked and begged Isabella to delete any recordings, explaining that such accusations could destroy David's career and their marriage. Isabella refused to delete anything, claiming she needed protection from David's threats. When David asked what threats she was referring to, Isabella began fabricating stories about him making intimidating gestures and violent comments when Rachel was not present. Rachel found herself caught between her husband and her sister, unsure what to believe, but desperate to find a resolution that would not tear her family apart. The situation escalated when Isabel demanded that David apologize for his behavior and admit that he had been trying to drive her away from Rachel. David refused to apologize for things he had not done, explaining calmly that he had tried to be welcoming despite Isabel's inappropriate behavior. Isabel responded by threatening to release the recordings to Rachel's school district and David's employer, claiming they would show his true character. Rachel pleaded with both of them to find a compromise, but Isabella seemed determined to force a confrontation. She began making increasingly wild accusations, claiming that David had been watching her through her bedroom window and making threatening phone calls to her friends. David realized that Isabella was building a case against him that could destroy his life even if the accusations were eventually proven false. The final confrontation began when Isabella cornered Rachel in the bedroom and demanded that she choose between her husband and her sister. Isabella claimed that David was planning to hurt her and the baby, and that Rachel needed to ask him to leave immediately. When Rachel refused and tried to reason with her sister, Isabella became physically aggressive, grabbing Rachel's arms and shaking her while screaming about family loyalty. David heard the commotion and rushed to the bedroom, finding Isabella on top of Rachel, who was crying and trying to push her sister away. When David tried to separate them, Isabella spun around and attacked him with her fingernails, scratching deep gouges across his face while screaming that he was assaulting a pregnant woman. Rachel was horrified by the violence and begged them both to stop. Isabella suddenly clutched her stomach and claimed that David had caused her to fall and hurt the baby. She demanded that Rachel call for medical help immediately, but there was no cell service and the landline had been disconnected for the winter. Isabella's distress seemed genuine, and Rachel was terrified that her sister might lose the baby because of the confrontation. David tried to assess Isabella's condition using his military first aid training, but she refused to let him touch her and accused him of trying to finish what he had started. Rachel was torn between helping her sister and protecting her husband from false accusations. The cabin felt like a trap with no escape and no way to get help. Isabella's behavior became increasingly erratic as the evening progressed. She would clutch her stomach and moan in pain one moment, then stand up and pace angrily the next. She continued making threats about the recordings and promised that David would pay for what he had done to her and her baby. Rachel tried desperately to calm both of them down while dealing with her own fear and confusion. The night took a darker turn when Isabella revealed that she had been lying about the pregnancy timeline and that David might be the father of her baby. She claimed they had slept together before his marriage to Rachel, a complete fabrication that sent Rachel into shock and rage. David vehemently denied the accusation, but Isabella produced what appeared to be evidence supporting her story. When the sheriff's department arrived at the cabin, they found David sitting on the front steps with blood on his clothes and hands, staring straight ahead without responding to their questions. Rachel had been rushed to the hospital with a severe concussion and multiple injuries, while Isabella was missing with only a blood trail leading into the woods behind the cabin. The scene appeared to confirm the worst-case scenario that everyone feared. Detective Maria Santos had worked domestic violence cases for 15 years, but the brutality at the cabin shook even her experienced nerves. The kitchen showed signs of a violent struggle, with overturned furniture, broken dishes, and blood spatter patterns that suggested multiple impacts. David's military background made him a prime suspect, as investigators knew trained soldiers could be deadly when they lost control. David was arrested and charged with attempted murder and assault with a deadly weapon. He maintained his innocence but could not provide a coherent explanation of what had happened during the final hours at the cabin. His lawyer advised him to remain silent until they could piece together a defense, but the evidence seemed overwhelming. Rachel's injuries were consistent with being beaten by someone much stronger, and Isabella's disappearance suggested the worst possible outcome. The investigation took an unexpected turn when Isabella's blood trail led to a hidden bunker beneath an old hunting cabin 2 miles away. The bunker had been stocked with supplies, weapons, and false identification documents. Most shocking was the discovery of detailed surveillance photos of David and Rachel taken over several months, along with handwritten plans describing how to destroy their marriage and frame David for domestic violence. Isabella's true identity began to emerge through federal database searches that revealed she was actually named Victoria Brennan, a convicted fraudster who had served time for identity theft and insurance fraud. She had been using the Martinez family name for over 2 years, having met the real Isabella Martinez in a women's shelter and stolen her identity after Isabella died in a car accident. The pregnancy was real, but medical records showed the father was unknown. The surveillance evidence revealed that Victoria had been planning her scheme for months before moving in with David and Rachel. She had researched David's military background, Rachel's teaching career, and their financial situation. Her goal was to frame David for assault, sue him for damages, and then disappear with a substantial settlement. The mountain cabin had been chosen specifically because of its isolation and lack of communication. Rachel's recovery in the hospital provided crucial testimony that contradicted the initial assumptions about the case. When she regained consciousness, Rachel revealed that Isabella had attacked her first, hitting her with a heavy candlestick when Rachel refused to ask David to leave. David had actually saved Rachel's life by intervening, but Isabella had used the struggle to stage her own disappearance and make it appear that David was the aggressor. The recordings that Isabella had threatened to release were found in the bunker, but they told a different tale than anyone expected. The audio files had been edited to remove context and make David's responses to Isabella's provocations sound threatening. However, the original, unedited files were also preserved, showing Isabella coaching herself on how to manipulate situations and create false evidence of harassment. Medical evidence from Rachel's injuries supported her testimony that Isabella had been the primary aggressor. The pattern of wounds was consistent with being struck by someone shorter than David and using a blunt object rather than fists. Rachel's defensive wounds showed she had tried to protect herself from someone she trusted, which explained why the attack had been so devastating. The discovery of weapons in the bunker suggested that Victoria had been prepared for violence if her psychological manipulation failed. Police found a handgun registered to another false identity, along with ammunition and detailed floor plans of David and Rachel's home. Her backup plan apparently involved more direct methods of achieving her goals if the frame-up did not work. Victoria's criminal history revealed a pattern of targeting military families, using emotional manipulation and false accusations to extort money and destroy relationships. She had successfully run similar schemes in 3 other states, always disappearing before authorities could build a solid case against her. The Colorado incident was meant to be her biggest score, with David's security consulting business providing a lucrative target. The breakthrough in finding Victoria came when a hiker discovered her makeshift camp 3 miles from the bunker. She had been living rough in the mountains for weeks, apparently waiting for the heat to die down before implementing the next phase of her plan. When arrested, Victoria was carrying detailed notes about Rachel's recovery and plans to approach her with a fabricated story about escaping from David's violence. Victoria's capture 18 months after the cabin incident revealed the true scope of her elaborate scheme. She had been operating under at least 7 different identities over the past 5 years, targeting military families specifically because their training and backgrounds made them easy to frame for domestic violence. Her methods were sophisticated, involving months of preparation, psychological profiling, and careful documentation of fabricated evidence. The real Isabella Martinez had been a victim of domestic violence who died in a car accident while fleeing her abusive husband. Victoria had met her at a women's shelter and befriended her during her final weeks of life. When Isabella died, Victoria assumed her identity and began researching her family, eventually targeting Rachel because of her stable marriage to a military veteran with financial assets. Medical examination revealed that Victoria's pregnancy was the result of a brief relationship with a man she had met while operating under another false identity in Texas. She had used the pregnancy as a tool to gain sympathy and access to David and Rachel's home, calculating that a pregnant woman would be seen as vulnerable and trustworthy. The baby was born healthy while Victoria was in custody awaiting trial. The edited recordings that Victoria had planned to use as evidence against David were examined by audio forensics experts who found clear signs of manipulation. She had recorded hundreds of hours of conversations, then used sophisticated software to create conversations that never actually occurred. Her technical skills suggested extensive training in electronic surveillance and audio editing. Rachel's recovery was long and difficult, involving both physical rehabilitation and psychological counseling to deal with the trauma of being betrayed by someone she had trusted completely. She struggled with guilt over not recognizing Victoria's deception sooner and anger at herself for putting David in such a dangerous situation. The experience strengthened their marriage but left lasting scars on both of them. David was completely exonerated of all charges when the full truth emerged, but the false accusations had already damaged his reputation and career. Several clients cancelled contracts with his security consulting business, and he struggled with depression and anxiety following the ordeal. He credited Rachel's support and his military training with helping him survive the psychological aftermath of Victoria's manipulation. The investigation revealed that Victoria had been in contact with other criminals who specialized in identity theft and fraud targeting military families. Her arrest led to a federal investigation that uncovered a network of individuals using similar tactics across multiple states. David and Rachel's case became a catalyst for improved protection programs for military families and better training for law enforcement in recognizing sophisticated manipulation schemes. Victoria was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison on charges including identity theft, fraud, kidnapping, and assault. Her baby was placed with adoptive parents who were unaware of the circumstances surrounding the child's birth. Victoria showed no remorse during sentencing and continued to maintain that David had attacked her, demonstrating the depth of her psychological manipulation even when faced with overwhelming evidence. David and Rachel rebuilt their lives slowly, moving to a new city where they could start fresh without the constant reminders of Victoria's deception. Rachel returned to teaching with a newfound understanding of how to recognize signs of manipulation and abuse in her students' families. David expanded his security consulting business to include training programs for families dealing with stalking and harassment, using his experience to help others protect themselves from similar schemes. The trauma of their experience taught them valuable lessons about trust, family boundaries, and the importance of listening to their instincts. David learned that his military training in recognizing threats was valuable in civilian life, while Rachel discovered that loyalty to family must be balanced with protection of her marriage. They both became advocates for better support systems for military families facing complex domestic situations. Their case became a teaching tool for law enforcement agencies, demonstrating how sophisticated criminals can manipulate family relationships and exploit trust to achieve their goals. The investigation revealed the need for better coordination between agencies when dealing with identity theft cases that cross state lines. David and Rachel regularly speak at conferences about their experience, helping other families recognize warning signs of manipulation. 3 years after the cabin incident, David and Rachel welcomed their first child, a daughter they named Hope. The experience of becoming parents deepened their appreciation for the life they had built together and their gratitude for surviving Victoria's scheme. They established a foundation to help military families dealing with domestic violence and fraud, turning their traumatic experience into a source of help for others. The case serves as a powerful reminder that evil often wears a familiar face, and that the people closest to us can sometimes pose the greatest threats. However, it also demonstrates the strength that comes from standing together, trusting your instincts, and refusing to let manipulation destroy what you have built. David and Rachel's survival and recovery prove that even the most elaborate schemes can be overcome when people support each other and refuse to give up hope. If this account has resonated with you, please share it with others who might benefit from understanding these warning signs. Your engagement helps ensure that stories like David and Rachel's reach the people who need to hear them most. Consider subscribing to stay updated on more true accounts that explore the darker aspects of human nature, while celebrating the resilience of those who refuse to become victims.